Hello, welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we are joined by Ben Sellers, who is going to talk to us about socialism and organising. Hi, Ben.
Hi there, Paul. You all right?
I'm not bad, thanks. How are you? So what I'm going to ask you to start off with is, what do you believe socialism is?
I mean, it's different things for different people, I suppose, and I don't think there's one answer to that. I mean, I've had kind of like I've had quite an academic background in a way. I went to Leeds University, did an MA there, started a PhD, never finished it. But so like I was introduced to some ideas around socialism, like academically, but I think like sort of at a deeper level, much before that, I think I was probably a socialist long before that, and I suppose it came for me would be more around the kind of social justice kind of angle. So like I just remember feeling from quite a young age just enraged at injustice, and a lot of that was cultural things. So like watching films and reading stuff, and like reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and I was very kind of at an early age was very kind of influenced by anti-racism. So like I was an anti-racist before I was a socialist, I would say, but I very soon became sort of more interested in the bigger picture around kind of justice, I suppose, and like what were the real injustices and why were people kind of what about economic injustice, and that's about the sort of time that I started picking up books about socialism. So I remember reading Oscar Wilde's A Soul of Man and the Socialism, which was quite influential on me. I mean, it's quite a simple way of describing it, really. Started reading some Marx, was very put off by it quite quickly. Apart from I did quite like the Communist Manifesto, but I'm not somebody that's read the whole volumes of Capital and things like that. I suppose like I had more of a kind of idea of I mean, definitely I think that there are some fundamental kind of injustices and inequalities that are very obvious. I think sort of my own experience of living in Sweden when I was a kid. So, and I thought about this quite a lot, really, but having that kind of background. So I went there when I was 4, came back when I was 9. And you wouldn't think that would have an awful lot of kind of political influence on you. But I think that I had this kind of like rage about when I came back to England, and we came back on the day that Charles and Di got married, which was bizarre for basically a Swedish kid to come in with all these, like coming in off the ferry at North Shields and seeing all these flags everywhere and just people being mental. And so there was kind of like that feeling of alienation slightly, although I did sort of feel English, but like that Swedish influence and like the equality that I saw around me in Sweden, which was, Sweden in the 70s was obviously a very different place from what it is now. But, I can remember when I was little that there was like a communal, like we lived in quite a small community, but there was like a communal swimming pool that was like really, really posh one. Now, you'd think like you were walking into a kind of a Bannatynes or something like that, and there was a sauna there that everybody, and there was no payment. You just walked in, you did your exercise classes, then you walked out, and it was quite bizarre to come to England in Thatcher's Britain, a few years later, and feel that everything was being monetized and everything was, there was just restrictions on you, and there wasn't that kind of equality. And I saw it as a kind of less free society. I mean, a lot of people think of socialism as being kind of about restricting freedom, and I don't see it like that at all. I see socialism is the chance for everybody to have that kind of freedom to kind of live the kind of life with a bit of respect and dignity and happiness, time off. So I suppose in the big picture, that's how I kind of see socialism.
It's really interesting what you're saying about this sort of the shared areas, the shared sauna, the shared swimming pool. And I know a lot of people who I've spoken to who grew up in East Durham actually highlight that the miners built a swimming pool and they had the welfare parks and had these places that they could share. And it seems that that kind of thing is influential on you as well. Do you think that are there some parodies there?
Yeah, as I say, kind of not at a theoretical level, probably more kind of like as those as people talk about the kind of when you talk about the kind of miners' welfare systems and the kind of sharing in communities and that kind of sense of solidarity, it's quite hard for sometimes I think for people to put their finger on it and maybe talk about it as socialism. Maybe it's just like Jeremy's always very good at this, like just like encapsulating things very like it's about everybody looking after each other, and that sometimes is how simple socialism can be, but it's I do think that had a quite that kind of experience of those kind of shared societal goals that are kind of experienced at a very young age. So like there was definitely less materialism in Swedish society in that at that point. I never thought about I never thought about fashion or clothes or anything like that when I was younger, and it was kind of like it was about going out and enjoying nature and things like that. So, and I don't want to be too nostalgic about it because everybody, like a lot of people's childhood are like that, and it does. There is that kind of sense of like nostalgia about it, but it's also about, I think, about the kind of society that they wanted there in Sweden at the time, and I think parts of Northern England would have the same kind of like sort of moral principles, if you like, about kind of community and looking after each other. And actually, do you really need that kind of flash car, and do you need that expensive house and things like that? I mean, nobody at that point anyway in Sweden owned a house. You just didn't. And we had a house that came with my dad's job, basically, and it looked exactly the same as his boss's house over the road. There was no difference. There was, I think, one might have had a balcony, another didn't, something like that. There was obviously there was still a little bit of status to being like the boss kind of thing, but tiny kind of like differentials, and I think that was like throughout society in Sweden, but and I do think there's a little bit of that in the northeast as well. It's like kind of and obviously some of it can turn out to be like that kind of jealousy and like, oh, you shouldn't get above your station and all that, and I do understand that side of things, but there's also this kind of sense of like what really matters to people is a kind of sense of community and looking after each other, and marriage and all all that kind of thing. And I immediately I'm not, obviously I wasn't born here. I was born in Bristol actually, much to my shame. But immediately, interestingly, when we left Sweden, my dad got a job out there, and he was supposed to stay for 6 months. Basically, it was like let's go and see what Sweden's like for 6 months. Ended up staying for nearly 5 years, just over 5 years, and and when they came back, they were from down south. They were from Windsor actually, but they just decided, like literally, like looking at a map, where should we be? Where do we want to live? And my dad got offered this job in hospital in Morpeth, and immediately they thought, well, it's closer to Sweden, not geographically, but in terms of like the kind of experience. They didn't want to go back to, especially at that point, like the kind of like beginnings of Thatcherism. A lot of their friends had sort of turned towards that kind of politics and were loving making loads of money on their houses and the boom, the housing market boom and things like that. And I think they were so like put off by all that they kind of thought, I think we feel more at home in Northumberland, so we ended up just ended up in the north of England. But I immediately felt at home here as well, I think probably more so than I would have done if I'd lived down south. I don't mean that in a kind of like, I'm not a massive like kind of hate the southeast kind of person. Obviously there's I've got a lot of like connections. My sister lives in London now, and I love being there. But I think in terms of that kind of, don't know how to describe it apart from like a kind of philosophy really of life. The Northeast has something special about it.
Again, I'm really interested in this idea of like the shared system in Sweden. And it's funny you talked about a swimming pool and the sauna that you would share that was really high quality. And it's almost like we see that for rich people in this country, they might go around each other's houses and jump in each other's swimming pool, or go and use each other's tennis courts. And is there an element of kind of like this country being socialism for the rich and the massive benefits of socialism for the rich, and then everyone else gets capitalism?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Socialism for the rich. There was that meme that went around a while ago, and obviously, like, not everybody kind of gets that idea. But I was always quite like, I've always thought that we'd be. There's this kind of stereotype around socialism that we are Puritans, and that we are, that we would, if it was up to us, we'd all be walking around in the, in sort of, blue uniforms, and nobody would be enjoying themselves, nobody would be drinking, nobody would be watching crap TV, or going to football, anything like that. And I hate that kind of idea. I mean, I think it's really what you're talking about there is a kind of a communist idea, or like certain parts of the world where communism has become more like a state power, like in Russia and China. And there are elements of that kind of Puritan kind of philosophy that goes alongside that, and I think that is about controlling populations and so on. And but I don't think that's got anything to do with my idea of what socialism is. I mean, as I said before, I think socialism is about freedom, but it's about freedom for everybody, and it's about, like, it can be about like luxury and nice things, but nice things, let's have nice things for everybody. Let's have like good gyms for everybody. Let's have let's have people should be able to have nice food and be able to enjoy themselves. And like, there is this kind of meanness that has come in, and I think Thatcher had a lot to do with this, because she liked to set, she had this philosophy of setting people against each other, like, and I think it runs through Tory ideology as well. Of if you're a socialist, then you should be wearing a hair shirt, and you should be, you should live by your principles, which are, that you should never enjoy yourself, never have any luxury, never have a mobile phone. It's a bit like what they say about asylum seekers now. You shouldn't have what are they doing with their mobile phones and flat screen TV? Well, actually, a mobile phone might be a complete lifeline for an asylum seeker, but also, like, do human beings not deserve to have enjoyment in their lives? Isn't that like a basic fundamental thing about being human and living? And is it right that people, and I suppose this comes back to my kind of injustice kind of idea about the bigger sort of injustices that happen in capitalist society, basically. And those are about people that live their lives, throughout their lives without that kind of freedom to have, the nice things in life, to enjoy themselves, to have the bread but the roses as well, kind of thing. And I think, like, I really like that idea. I really like the idea of the bread and roses, and I'm not like this kind of, I really aren't on a kind of a strict Marxist in that sense, in that what socialism or Marxism is about is just feeding people. It should be about people having the freedom to live a good life as well.
I think you've summed that up really nicely. It's simply just about fairness for people and everyone having the opportunity to enjoy their lives and have some dignity in their lives, and that's certainly what socialism for me is as well. I want to talk now about the power of organising. So how do you organise to help the public understand these socialist ideas? Like, you've done a lot of organising, both as a trade unionist and within the labour movement. So can you tell me a little bit about your background in organising?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, because I was talking about anti-racism, and I was talking about Sweden, and was talking about my kind of first ideas about socialism. I mean, I had all these ideas, but I didn't really know how to kind of how to put them into practice and how to be useful in terms of kind of also communicating them with other people. Because as a young kind of precocious lad, you can sort yourself out, you can sort your own ideas out, but how on earth do you deal with a society that doesn't really want to listen to those ideas? And I think really the thing that kind of was a breakthrough moment for me was joining a trade union, and I did that out of actually when I was working at Waterstones as a bookseller, and I was there for far too long. I was like, I was one of these jokes where like you go along, you say, oh, I'm going to just do Waterstones for 6 months just to get myself sorted. I ended up staying 7 years, and in that time I became increasingly bitter about the way that the company was run, because when I first was there, it was run by Tim Waterstone, who founded the company, and they used to do things like, I mean, they did call it like a socialist company. I don't think it was that good, but it was, we used to not open on a Monday morning because people would be given an hour to talk about what they're reading that they've done over the weekend and things like that. So it was quite a nice company. Like when I first started, it was terrible pay. I think it was I think it was £3.75 an hour, but I might be overestimating there. But it was it was very quickly kind of taken over by HMV, and we had it was just this kind of like all-out assault on the staff, basically. I can't describe it as anything else. So we had our bonuses taken away, we had all of our perks taken away, none of that kind of reading malarkey. Or just like we used to sort of joke about it, but it was like literally people saying, your job is to, you're just a till operator. That's what you do. Never mind all this kind of like pretentious idea that you are a bookseller. So that kind of drew me into trade union organising, basically, because what I did at first, because that kind of sense of injustice that I had, like from the kind of like early kind of ideas around anti-racism and things like that. But when people got treated badly at Waterstones, I used to stand up for them, and I used to be completely reckless. I mean, I remember what the first thing that I did when I started thinking in terms of when HMV came in, I wrote this kind of scurrilous newsletter that I would send around to all of the branches of Waterstones, which just totally took the piss out of the HMV management. And it was really quite, I mean, bordering libelous, but it was everything, all of the kind of terminology that they used, because they used to talk about hygiene in the stores and things like that. So I took the piss out of that and all, and I got into terrible trouble. Basically, I got called in by the management, and it went quite high level, the regional manager would come and have a word with me and stuff, and they basically told me that I was on my last warning kind of thing. And then I discovered, partly just reading and looking online, and it's kind of early days of the internet actually, looking online and finding trade unions, and I joined the booksellers union at the time, and started getting myself trained as a rep, and it just completely changed my whole idea of what you could do as, I mean, maybe it partly is a socialist, but also just as somebody that wants to change things, like an organizer. And I learned a hell of a lot just by doing the reps courses for a start. And then gradually I got to learn, I mean, a lot of it off my own kind of bat, but like learn the like how to pull people together, how to kind of form a union. And then I had a moped at the time, and I used to go around on my moped to different branches and just go into the staff room and talk to people about joining the union. And then I gradually got better and better at this and started winning some cases. And then the Waterstones management didn't like me, so they used to ban me from stores and all this sort of stuff. But it was fascinating, kind of like learning journey, really. But I suppose the key to it really was that here for the first time, I felt like I was doing something practical before. Like before, my socialism felt a little bit kind of academic. Like, you know, we have these ideas about justice and about equality and stuff like that, but it didn't really feel like I was completely. I wasn't, you know, like I wasn't like really helping people, and I just loved that idea. And you Paul would have had the same experience, like as a rep, like especially when you're at quite a kind of low level of the trade union movement. The satisfaction that you get from just solving one thing for people, one issue. And then even more satisfaction when you join people together and they solve it for themselves, and then they turn around to you and go, hey, you know, we did it. And it sounds a bit romantic, and I don't mean it like that, because there was a lot of crap along the way. There was a lot of defeats as well. But I did sort of gradually get to understand what organising was. So I left Waterstones after a long time of trying to get out, and eventually I made the break and started working in libraries. And first thing I did, like, because I was kind of I would describe myself as, you know, like trade unionist first and foremost at that point. And the first thing I did when I went to work in the university library was to go around and ask people if they were in the union. And a lot of them said, oh yeah, we are, I am, I think, but I think I pay subs, but I mean, nobody ever does anything, so what's the point, kind of thing. So I got people together in kind of had to first win a battle just to get allowed for us to be allowed to meet within the library premises, because the first thing they said, the librarian there said, no, you're not allowed to Unison aren't allowed to meet in the library. And I thought I'm not having this. So we, you know, that was the first battle. But then when we got people together, and there was like maybe, I don't know, 20 people or something came to a meeting in a lunchtime, and I kind of like was flying by my seat in my pants a little bit, but I got a flip chart out and started, you know, saying like, okay, give me 3 issues that you're interested in changing in this, you know, what pisses you off most about this place. And the first thing that people said was incredible, really. They said, there's just no drinking water. There's no proper drinking water anywhere for the staff. You might get there if you're a student, but you won't get one. You won't get any of your staff. And you have to walk from one end of the library, which takes about 10 minutes, to the staff room to get a drink of water. And that takes up half your break. So, like, you know, like, to cut a long story short, we basically campaigned on that. That was our first campaign. And we won it, and we got water coolers put in all over the staff areas and things. And people were like amazed. They were like, oh my God, we can't believe we won this great victory. And there's me thinking, that's quite a small victory compared to what we're going to do next. But we did like then people's confidence sort of grew from that. And then, which was amazing to watch, actually, because a lot of the people at the library, and I don't mean this to be patronising, but a lot of them were kind of like older women and not very confident, and didn't really feel like they could stand up to the librarian, who was like this kind of patriarchal figure, you know, and they were amazed at their own power, like just from that one thing, you know. And then the next thing we came across was like, so we got, you know, gathered people together again in the meeting, and that we used to have these regular meetings now. And then once we won that, we sort of said like, what's next? And then they said, well, flexi time. Like, why are we not allowed to have flexi time? And then we campaigned on that, and we found out that other libraries nearby had flexi time for their frontline staff, no problem at all. And we won that one. That was a bigger battle. It took a lot more, and there was more resistance. We won that one. And then after that came like the stuff on pay and terms and conditions, and the fact that some people were being paid less than others for doing exactly the same job. So it was like almost like an equal pay kind of claim. It wasn't as formal as that, but basically there were people that were on contracts where they were for no justification whatsoever, they were getting paid significantly less, and we won that. And that I had more kind of help from Unison, like regionally, with things like that, because obviously that was a bit above my pay grade kind of thing. But people were, I mean, like, I couldn't believe it. People are bringing me boxes of chocolates and all sorts of, like, it's very, very nice to get that recognition. But the great thing about it was really that we'd organised collectively. So I always think back to that as being quite a good kind of model of, like, so people were a bit depressed when I first turned up there. People were demoralised, didn't really feel like they could change anything. And then just by doing it in that kind of slicing it and just taking one step at a time and building people's confidence and then moving on to the next thing. And obviously I learned some of this. I formally learned more of this anyway when I then went from the library to then do an organising academy. So I spent a year at the TUC's Organising Academy, and that was just like the most amazing year that I had. I worked mainly with, because I designed my own project basically, which is an incredible like privilege really, and I was very jammy to get that, because most of the people on my academy year, had to do what the union told them. But like, because I was working for the TUC, they said, just, have you got any ideas? And I said, well, what about working with Polish workers and Eastern European migrants, and seeing if I can get more of those people into the union and organising. So I did that for a year and used the same kind of, like, that same idea of, like, starting off with simple issues, talking, hell of a lot of talking and listening to people, and then building and building and building. And obviously, like, I'm not going to claim any great victories for that, because I think it was incredibly hard to get Eastern European workers to join the union and be accepted in the union. So it was a struggle. But I mean, there were also great things about that year. Like, I got to know a whole group of people that I would never have known before. And one of the people I worked with actually took my job, took my place at the Organising Academy the next year, a Polish lad, which was just the most satisfying thing. But that taught me organising basically, and I've kind of like spent the rest of my life since then. So that was 2007 to 8. I've spent the rest of my time trying to find a way in which we can use that for the Labour Party and for socialists, that kind of model of organising.
So you've really, like, you've given us a great story there about what organising is, because I think, when we talk about organising, people really don't know what it is, and it's really just getting people together and working together for a mutual benefit. That's the point of organising, isn't it? And it's just making sure those connections are made. So you worked within the Labour Party to try and organise the Jeremy Corbyn's leadership campaign. Can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So I mean, people often say, they know that I've been involved with the social media campaign, and like, and it's quite hard to explain really sometimes, because I've got no real kind of skills in social media at all, or nothing that I've kind of like, I'm not a great, I don't know how to do graphics really. I mean, I did art at A level actually, but so I've got a like slight eye for things, but like I have no skills whatsoever. So I literally do memes on Paint, which is like so out of touch with the rest of the kind of like, the brilliant people that do all the images, graphics for like Momentum or whatever. But and also I didn't really have any kind of knowledge of how to organise via social media, apart from when I was at the TUC. So this was 2008, kind of 2009. I worked with asylum seekers on a campaign around their right to work, and that was fascinating. And one of the things that obviously is an issue for asylum seekers is how do they campaign? Because a lot of them do want to campaign. There's this kind of idea of asylum seekers being kind of meek and like, we just got to look after them. But actually, a lot of them are political refugees for a start. So they've got incredible knowledge. I remember going down a kind of induction type of day organised by the local council down in Middlesbrough. And I went and I talked about, how what unions were and how they worked and everything like that. And this bloke stuck his hand up at the back and he said, "Oh yeah, just to let you know, I'm," and he wasn't being nasty about it, but he was just pointing out, so, "Just to let you know, I'm a general secretary. I was a general secretary of a union in Zimbabwe," and I was like so humiliated. But I mean, that just, and they were lovely about it, and we had a really good chat, and they got like more involved in the campaign as well. But that just shows you like that you shouldn't underestimate people, and people do really want to campaign, but obviously they can't do it publicly a lot of the time. So what they wanted to do was to kind of set up like a Facebook page where they could campaign, and they called it, Let Us Work, and then the kind of union campaign to go alongside that was called Let Them Work. So it was like two sides of this campaign, and we basically like kind of allowed them, and I organised it so they could be the voice, they could be the voices, but they also were protected by that social media. So that was my first kind of understanding of how social media might work. But then I just kind of, again, kind of flying by the seat of my pants a little bit, and did a lot through Red Labour. So I kind of cut my teeth a little bit with Red Labour and their social media presence. So we built this enormous kind of like Facebook page through with Red Labour, and that was very successful. It's quite small beer looking back now, but at the time it was quite a big deal. And Red Labour played a huge part in getting Jeremy onto the ballot paper, but mainly through like organising online lobbying of MPs, which to be honest had been done by groups like UK and Cut, which we learnt a lot from, but we kind of hadn't done it through the Labour Party before. So I think genuinely that campaign, and then what happened afterwards, Jeremy's social media campaign for the leadership, was probably the biggest kind of internal Labour Party campaign that had ever happened at the time. But I suppose what I want to say about that is that it wasn't about being snazzy. In fact, we kind of like deliberately like downplayed some of the graphical elements and the kind of branding and stuff like that, and we had lots of people doing different things, and so it looked more kind of grassroots rather than it being kind of this slick campaign. Because Andy Burnham tried the slick campaign, and it literally just died within, I think, 2 weeks of Jeremy coming in, because it was just so grey and it was so boring. So people would say to us, like, so I put together a team basically that was organising Jeremy's social media campaign, and people would come to us and say, I think what would be really good is if you had a template for everything, so everything kind of like looks slick and nice. And we'd be saying, don't know whether we really want it to look nice, because Jeremy's not like slick, and Jeremy like, and it's quite good to have a picture with Jeremy, playing the bongos or something, and then vote Jeremy Corbyn painted, like in the corner, whatever. I mean that's exaggerating, because like people, there were some really skilled like graphic people that got involved, but we didn't want it to be that kind of slick operation. And what we then also did, and this is where the organising stuff comes in, we made sure that we were like communicating right across the movement. So like we had so say Deepak, whatever, like they were saying to us, like, why doesn't Jeremy say this? Why can't Jeremy talk about PIP or whatever? And there was no reason why he wasn't. It was just that they hadn't. There was so much to do. But then we organised the kind of link between that group, Deepak, and Jeremy's campaign, and we became his voice. Obviously, we had to check with Jeremy that was all okay, and with his kind of policy team and stuff like that. But there was a kind of interaction between the social media and what was going on within the kind of central campaign, like the kind of nuts and bolts stuff that was doing. So the organising is really important, and again, it's about like picking out people, developing them, giving them a sense of responsibility, allowing them to have their voice. We did that right across the movement, and I mean, it wasn't, perfect. There were like times, I'm sure, that we had, I mean, you always kind of look back with rose-tinted glasses slightly, don't you? But I'm sure there were times when we pissed people off, and we didn't do things right, and we had little hiccups, and I can still remember things like kind of ending up on the front page of the Daily Mail. Actually, this is a good one. So Jeremy kind of Jeremy had his own social media, which didn't get much use, but it was there just for official kind of use. So like Jeremy Corbyn, just Jeremy Corbyn, not Jeremy Corbyn for leader. But the press didn't seem to understand the distinction between this campaign that we were running as a kind of group of 15 or so like activists and Jeremy's own social media. So they assumed that Jeremy ran it, which was ridiculous, really. But they would often quote directly from us, and we were quite conscious of this. But like I one morning, we kind of we put together this statement about I think it was about not singing the national anthem, but it was kind of like quite feisty, and it basically talked about the press only talking in terms of being obsessed with tittle tattle, and when there's big issues like poverty and all that, and I thought it was great, and we kind of come up with it together as a team, and we were quite proud of it, and we put it out there, and then I kind of switched off. I can't remember what I was doing, but I was doing something else for a couple of hours, and then I came back and I just checked. I always used to check Jeremy Corbyn's name on Google just to see how things were going and what press coverage we'd had. And the whole bloody front page of the Daily Mail, Jeremy Corbyn calls the national anthem or whatever it was tittle tattle, and it was just in all of the papers front page. And we did have to kind of like make we did have to distinguish then between our campaign a bit more and Jeremy's own voice, and that was fine. It was like learning process, but it to a certain extent was a mistake, but it's also like that was the freedom that we had, and I think that was partly about Jeremy and the people around him trusting us. And yeah, you get like the odd kind of mistake like that, but what the benefit that you get from that is like this incredible flowering of creativity. So we just drove. Like, I honestly think that like the social media campaign kind of drove a lot of that of that Jeremy Corbyn campaign in 2015, and I think, without being too critical, I think we lost a bit of that. Like, even in 2016, it was more conservative. It was more, and I say that advisedly because I still think it was a great campaign. But there was a little bit more caution there. There was a little bit more kind of the policy team taking over. It was a little bit more slick, and there was less creativity about it. And then I think that gradually went, and then we got to 2017, and it was like the light bulb sort of moment again, where people said, actually, this kind of constant like narrowing of our horizons isn't really working. Let's just go for it. And like, I really do think that about 2 weeks in 2017 in that general election campaign, which coincided with me getting a call from Kerry Murphy to ask me to come down and work on Jeremy's social media. But obviously there'd been some thinking going on around like, what we really needed to do. Like, let's be more radical. Let's like really like if we're gonna, in a way, it's that attitude. If we're gonna go down, let's go down fighting. But then quite often you don't end up going down because you're fighting, and it's quite a tough one, really, because I constantly feel this sense of like the pressure from above to sort of close in, and what that does is it squashes the organising, and it squashes the creativity. And I do totally know why it happens, and I'm not being overly critical of people that want discipline, and they want to know, they want to know when you're going to put stuff out, and and that you're going to check things. And I'm not at all an advocate of like crazy sort of like reckless social media, but what I do think that you need to have is that kind of that lovely creativity of the collective, and we did have that briefly, and I think we had it in 2017. I think that's also why we got so close as well.
I think one of my favourite moments of the 2017 campaign was I think it was on the news, and didn't Jeremy Corbyn's official page put a message onto something that Theresa May was saying?
Yeah, that was amazing, and I can't really take the credit for that completely, to be honest, because I think it was my colleague's idea, but we got a phone call from somebody like suggesting it, and then we discussed it, and we thought we had to think really, really quickly, because Jeremy was I think he was in Bolton or somewhere. And we had to decide whether to do this kind of intervention on. She was doing a Facebook Live, but it was like on Sky as well, I think. And we thought it would be great to Jeremy Corbyn from Islington just to ask a question, and of course, because we didn't realise this was going to happen like the way it did, to be fair, but of course, because Jeremy had commented on the Facebook, because of all the likes that it got and the comments and stuff, and people having a laugh about it, it went right to the top. So I don't know who it was. I've got a feeling it might have been. Oh no, I can't remember who the interviewer was. Anyway, so oh my God, we've got a question from Jeremy Corbyn of Islington. What was it? And I can't even remember what the question was now. But it was fairly, it was good, solid stuff. And she just absolutely lost it. Like, she just could not cope, because she, if anybody that could see Theresa May, she can't think on her feet. And really, we hadn't thought it out. Like, really, I suppose it could have gone wrong. But this is the thing, what I'm saying about that freedom to do it. So obviously, we checked with Jeremy and his team that were on a visit and stuff. So we had to check to make sure that he wasn't doing anything publicly while he was on Facebook asking questions to Theresa May. And obviously, he was completely up for it, because that's just Jeremy. So he's very, very happy to go along with stuff like that. But that's what you need, really. Like in a campaign, you need people to give the activists that freedom. Always with a sense of kind of responsibility, because I'm not, as I say, I'm not at all saying that that politicians should be led by their campaign teams. They have to be happy with doing that kind of creativity kind of organising. But it was very exciting to be involved with. Yeah.
So everything you've described there is really, really organic. It's social media at its best. People getting them involved because they want to be involved. And it's funny, because thinking about what you said about trade unionism and thinking about what you said about organising, there always seems to come an answer from somewhere. So one of the big things that we're dealing with at the moment in trade unionism in teaching is the senior leadership team coming and joining the union and sitting in meetings so that people don't feel free to speak. And now we see in social media, we've got a lot of money seems to be a lot more important than, so the algorithms have changed, and we've got advertising money coming in, and it seems to be, again, the rich and the powerful can do more with that medium. So how do we go about organising in the future? Do we have to stop relying on social media as much? Do we need to do something else? Does it need to be more person to person?
Yeah, I mean, I love all that social media stuff. Don't get me wrong, and I really think that there's still more to do with social media, more to develop, and more kind of empowering kind of organising that can happen with social media. But I think there has also been an over-reliance on it. So I think that we, because it's kind of instant, like instant gratification, really, the social media kind of campaigning, and but what we're sometimes missing is that kind of deeper engagement with people. So you get lots of likes and clicks and things like that, and I'm starting to see this a lot more, to be honest, like a lot where we are kind of, I've always kicked against this idea that we are just an echo chamber, because I don't think that a lot of social media organising has broken outside of that, and I think we need to acknowledge that. But there is an element of which, when it becomes more of a kind of thing that you do by rote, where it becomes more kind of less creative and less kind of engaging with people, then I think that it can't, there is a danger that it just becomes speaking to, you know, your crowd and your supporters, and it maybe becomes a bit of an echo chamber. So I think that there's different ways in which you can break out of that. One is to be more kind of, to think more about what you do on social media. So maybe use it a little bit more as a kind of organising tool rather than as just a publicity tool, because I think there's maybe too much of the kind of just firing out like memes and videos and things, and not really thinking about who they're targeted at and things like that. So I think a bit more kind of creativity with that, and also like maybe being a bit more kind of educative with it. So more kind of stuff around the history of the movement, more things which invite debate. But also I think that we need to get offline as well. So that I do think increasingly, I think this is more and more important, and I suppose it's hit home because of the general election result. But I think that I was feeling this before as well, that some of our organising amongst ourselves was suffering because there was too much of a reliance on kind of speaking to each other online. And it's ironic, really, because we're doing a lot of good things at the moment because of lockdown, and we're communicating a lot more because of lockdown. But I do feel like there comes a point at which, you know, we have to, if we're gonna break beyond like organising amongst ourselves, we have to go out and we have to talk to people in communities, and we have to start taking risks and maybe engage with arguments with people and listen to them. So all that sort of stuff that I've learned through trade union organising, I'm kind of interested in how that can relate to what we do in the party, and I think some of the community organising stuff is interesting as well. But again, it has to be a little bit risky and a bit creative, and we have to go along to places where we're not maybe welcome, but we can meet people on familiar ground maybe, but then we can talk to people in a way which treats them as adults. One of the things that we did briefly in the general election campaign with Laura was kind of to set up like almost like free for all public meetings. So we would just advertise them and see who turned up. And it was a bit scary, to be honest, because Laura attracts fair amount of like really kind of nasty right wing attention. But it was great as well because like we just had people that just would fire questions at her that sometimes they were completely off the wall, like they got completely the wrong impression of what Laura's politics were. So she's able to she's very good at thinking on her feet, obviously, which is one of the skills I think that you need as an organizer. And Laura's a good organizer, actually, apart from being a good MP and a politician. But thinking on your feet, being able to answer people, being able to be honest with people. So we need to probably organise ourselves as CLPs to do an awful lot more of that, just like those kind of open conversations. And then also there's also about kind of supporting things that go on in communities. So not going along there and astroturfing and saying this is our campaign, but going along asking people in the community centre a bit like what I did with the library assistants and that, saying, what are the things that piss you off in this community? What are the things that you would like to change? How can we help you achieve those things? So it's a hell of a task, but I think that we have to start doing things like that.
When we have a situation where we have lots and lots of people inspired by left-wing politics and socialism, why is it that our message, it's so difficult to get that message through to communities? Because throughout the COVID crisis, we've seen people who are socialists, identifying as socialists, doing a lot of work, but you're not really seeing hundreds of thousands of Conservative Party members coming out and helping people. And yet, many people on the left are still seen as the enemy. So how do we start to go about combating that?
I mean, it's an interesting question, really, isn't it? And sometimes I think this can be really demoralising for us as well, as a party and as socialists, to see, a lot of good work that goes on. And we know, me, you, Paul, we know how good people are. I mean, some really, really good people around in this movement that absolutely give themselves to their communities, but also to each other as socialists, and all and there is very little reward. Sometimes it feels like there's there's kind of disconnect between all of that kind of good work and the fact that the Tories basically come up with a slogan which wins them a general election. It's more complicated than that, obviously, and undoubtedly there were mistakes that were made that made it more difficult for us. But I think that the media obviously has a massive effect, and I think that partly because us on the left, we get our news from different places. We don't maybe understand how important that is to people, especially like an older generation, and also people that are more disconnected from the kinds of places where we're getting our news from. So this is the problem with some of the kind of left projects that I think are very, very interesting for people like me, but they're kind of like on an intellectual level, and so that doesn't connect with people, whereas people can read the Daily Mail and they can read the Sun and they immediately connect on, it could just be a headline, it could be I mean, the amount of people that read the Sun or even the Mail actually for sport, and then their eyes will just be caught by a headline in amongst the pages, and they're not bothered about, they won't see themselves as being indoctrinated by that newspaper. They will just see it as natural that Corbyn is whatever, an anti-Semite or a racist or a communist or a joker or a unpatriotic or whatever it is. They just see that, and they it's a subliminal thing. And without wanting to get too theoretical about it, I'm quite a big fan of Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist that was like a dissident Marxist, I suppose you would say, like somebody that didn't agree with the Communist Party line from Soviet Russia. And his whole kind of philosophy was about winning hearts and minds. That's the simplest way of describing it, really. And he said that actually some of the cultural things around, and he talked a lot about newspapers, actually, even though he was writing in the kind of early 20th century. He talked a lot about newspapers. He talked a lot about culture in the media and how, for instance, in plays, in the theatre, how the ruling class kind of ideology just became common sense to people. And this is something that I think we as socialists need to get our heads around. Like, how do things like, the things that we're all struggling with, and we don't know where they come from, but how do they get into people's heads? We were saying about psychology before. I'm really kind of interested in the psychology of how those things, around, say, even the stuff around Black Lives Matter, you know, like the kind of the idea that you know, uncritical views of the British Empire, you know, like where does that come from? And it you know, it's not as simple as just saying that people read it in newspapers and therefore take it on, but it's like a combination of things that happen to people that and things that they don't read and that they don't see, and we find it very hard to get our narratives into the mainstream, and I think that's something that we need to really think about as socialists. And they're very good at doing that. That's what they've done, all, you know, and they have the help of the media to do that. And also now, I think they also have the help of a lot of social media, because when Facebook first came along and Twitter and so on, we kind of had it as part of our arsenal in a way, didn't we? We saw it as positive for the left, and I think we did use it very, very well, like in Corbyn's campaign, and I think UK Uncut and people like that, you know, used it well before Corbyn as well. But now I think that kind of more underground with Facebook in particular, that the far right have, and I say far right meaning quite a large part of the right these days, have captured it. And they use kind of smaller Facebook private groups and you know, like community pages to spread quite. I mean, we see them as offensive, but actually to a lot of people, they're just common sense. So the idea that Corbyn was a IRA sympathiser, just you know, it's become common sense to people, and they don't really know where it's come from, but it's just there, and a lot of it will be sort of a combination of, like, you know, tabloid headlines, but also like confirmation from, like, you know, gobshites. It's the only word I can think of on social media. But like people who are gobshites, but who have followings. You know, that people listen to them partly because they just talk and talk and talk and talk, and that is like I'm not sure we've got like equivalent, because we talk to ourselves a lot, but we don't talk an awful lot to our communities and stuff. I did think about something that we, you know, maybe we could do with those groups, those kind of local community pages, was kind of to build our own, I suppose. But it's easier said than done, and it needs to have quite strong roots within the communities, and maybe that's taking us back then to, like, what do we do? And we need to be a bit self-critical, I think, as a party and as socialists, about the campaigning that we do, and maybe see, like, really understand what community organising means, and like how deeply involved you need to be in your local community to start kind of challenging these myths. Because, like, again, taking this from a kind of union perspective, one of the things that we were taught as organisers, and I'm sure you've heard this, was about inoculation. So, like, inoculating your members against these kind of right-wing ideas or anti-union ideas in that case. So, like, you know, they would always, like, if there's an organising campaign, like a recognition campaign going on in a workplace, you'll always get, like, the boss sending around you know, kind of messages through that goes through that kind of the favoured staff and things, and then they tell their mates, and then, oh yeah, the union will just get you sacked, blah 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 blah, and all this sort of stuff. And we have a similar thing going on, I think, in our communities, and we're not very good at inoculating them from the myths of the press and of those kind of quite toxic social media groups that are developing like wildfire. So we need to do some proper thinking about that. I don't think there's any kind of simple solutions and magic around it, but I think we need to start, like, sitting down, maybe at a local level, and saying, look, you know, what are the kind of, where are people getting these ideas from? How can we challenge them? How can we get a foot in the door with people? And it's been interesting now, because I'm working for Mary Foy, obviously, and I've been given a role of doing more kind of community stuff than I would have done with Laura. And it's really, I mean, I'm really looking forward to getting properly stuck in after lockdown. But one of the things we've been talking about is, like, you know, football clubs. How can we like, you know, get seriously involved in supporting football clubs and actually taking you know, like taking the chance that a community football club can do, and sort of talking about anti-racism and having a kind of positive community feel about those football clubs. Same goes for like local community pubs. Same goes for like things like you know, like doing things around clubs that have maybe like working men's clubs that are maybe, you know, starting to kind of close down. Maybe we can revive them, can put some money into kind of revitalizing them and making them more relevant to today and stuff. And like, in a way, again, going right back to the beginning, you know, what this is exactly what the Durham Miners Association did all those years ago. It built community, like, you know, that's what it did. And they took all that very seriously, because they knew that when it came to a fight, they couldn't just sort of call people out on strike and, you know, and rely on that kind of loyalty. There had to be a two-way thing, and they had to build that community and that sense of loyalty to the union. And I'm not sure we've got that really with the party. I also did a really interesting discussion thing the other day about, I suppose it was partly about working class people and the way they feel about the Labour Party, and some really interesting people that were very honest and just said that in their communities the Labour Party is not seen as the party of the working class anymore, and I think we desperately need to address that, and it almost feels as if that should be our number one kind of priority, to understand why that is and how we can turn that around. But there aren't any simple solutions to that.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about psychology, it's very easy to have a message of fear that goes straight into the oldest part of the brain, and it's very easy to pick up. And if you're trying to explain something in a much deeper way, it takes a lot more effort to get that in. But I think the way to do that is, as you said, win hearts. And you can do that through having a message of hope and saying, look, your life can be better. It doesn't have to be like this. And I think that's where we are. But I'd like to thank you for coming on tonight, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing from you again at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
It's been a pleasure for me as well. Cheers.
Cheers.
See you.
Right.